The War Council chamber aboard the Terran dreadnought Defiance fell silent as Admiral Sarah Chen reviewed the intelligence reports one final time. The holographic displays cast an eerie blue glow across the faces of her senior staff, each one etched with the weight of what they all knew was coming. 3 months ago, humanity had made first contact with the Kythara Imperium, a coalition of 11 alien species that had dominated this sector of the galaxy for over 2 millennia. What should have been humanity's greatest moment had become its darkest hour. Chen's fingers traced over the tactical readouts, her mind processing casualty projections and fleet compositions with the cold precision that had earned her command of humanity's most advanced warship. At 52, she had risen through the ranks during humanity's expansion into the outer colonies, earning her reputation in the brutal suppression of the Martian independence movement, and later in the defense of Europa Station against pirates. But nothing in her 30-year career had prepared her for this. "Status report, Commander Hayes," Chen said, her voice steady despite the weight of humanity's survival resting on her shoulders. Commander Marcus Hayes stepped forward, his weathered face grim. At 60, Hayes was old for a fleet officer, but his experience in ship-to-ship combat was unmatched. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from the Titan raids, seemed to pulse in the artificial light. "Ma'am, the Kythara fleet has taken position at the Kepler Junction. 47 capital ships, each one the size of our largest carriers. They've issued their final ultimatum: submit to Imperial rule or face complete annihilation." The other officers exchanged worried glances. Captain Jennifer Morrison, commander of the carrier group, unconsciously touched the silver cross at her throat, a habit Chen had noticed whenever the younger woman was particularly stressed. Lieutenant Colonel Torres, the fleet's marine commander, sat rigid in his chair, his scarred hands clenched into fists. Even Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, their xenobiologist, and the closest thing they had to an expert on Kythara psychology, looked pale beneath her usually confident demeanor. In the 3 months since first contact, humanity had learned the harsh truth about their place in the galactic hierarchy. To the Kythara, humans were just another primitive species to be absorbed into their empire. The aliens had been genuinely puzzled by humanity's refusal to submit. After all, every other species had recognized the futility of resistance within days of contact. The first meeting had taken place in the neutral zone around Proxima Centauri. Captain Williams of the exploration vessel Endeavour had followed all established first contact protocols, broadcasting mathematical sequences and peaceful intentions. The Kythara response had been swift and absolute: surrender or be destroyed. When Williams had requested time to consult with Earth, they had been given 72 hours to make humanity's choice. That had been 3 months ago. 3 months of frantic preparation, desperate diplomacy, and growing realization that humanity faced an enemy unlike anything in their history books. "Their fleet composition?" Chen asked. "Standard Kythara battle formation," Hayes replied, pulling up holographic displays. The tactical projection showed a perfect geometrical arrangement of alien vessels, each ship positioned with mathematical precision. Heavy plasma cruisers in the vanguard, carrier groups in the center, and those massive dreadnoughts anchoring the rear. Intelligence estimates each of their capital ships could take on 5 of ours. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display, her mind racing through possibilities and probabilities. The Kythara had conquered dozens of worlds with this exact formation. It was overwhelming, efficient, and had never been defeated. Their ships were larger, their weapons more advanced, their shields impenetrable by any human technology. But as she stared at the alien fleet arrangement, something began to click into place. "Commander, what do we know about Kythara military doctrine?" she asked suddenly. Hayes frowned, accessing his datapad. "Ma'am, they follow what they call the path of inevitable victory. Every battle follows the same pattern, overwhelming force applied in perfect formation. They've never needed to adapt because nothing has ever challenged their supremacy. Intelligence reports from the hegemony of worlds before their conquest indicate that Kythara battles typically last less than 6 hours. Most enemies surrender within the first 2. And their psychology?" Chen pressed. Dr. Reeves leaned forward, her expertise finally relevant. "Pride-based hierarchy, Admiral. Each species in their Imperium has a designated role based on their perceived strengths. The Kythara themselves are the strategists and commanders. The Morvek handle ship operations and engineering. The Zelans specialize in weapon systems and maintenance. They believe in order, efficiency, and the fundamental impossibility of their defeat." She paused, consulting her notes. What's particularly interesting is their concept of warfare itself. To the Kythara, battle is a mathematical equation. Superior force plus superior positioning equals inevitable victory. They don't understand concepts like guerrilla warfare, asymmetric tactics, or what we might call fighting dirty. Their entire military culture is built around the idea that the stronger force should win, and anything that contradicts this is incomprehensible to them. Chen felt a cold smile creep across her face. "Commander, have you ever heard the phrase, 'Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face'?" Before Hayes could respond, the communications officer called out, "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Kythara flagship. They're demanding your response to their ultimatum. Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of Stratarch Vilex, Supreme Commander of the Kythara Expeditionary Force. His crystalline exoskeleton gleamed in the harsh lighting of his command center, and his 4 arms gestured in what intelligence had identified as expressions of supreme confidence. Behind him, the bridge of the Kythara flagship was a study in alien efficiency. Smooth surfaces, no visible crew, just the soft glow of what appeared to be organic control systems. "Admiral Chen of the Terran Primitives," Vilex's translated voice resonated through the chamber. The translation software struggled with the nuances of his speech, but the contempt was unmistakable. "You have had sufficient time to consider our generous offer. Pledge your species' loyalty to the Imperium, and you will be granted the honor of serving in our auxiliary fleets. Your warriors will fight for the greater glory of the Imperium. Your workers will contribute to our industrial capacity, and your thinkers will be allowed to study under the guidance of their betters. Refuse, and your worlds will be cleansed for more suitable inhabitants." Chen stepped forward, her posture radiating defiance. Around her, she could feel the tension from her officers, the weight of their hopes and fears. She thought of Earth, of the billions of people whose fate hung on this moment. She thought of her daughter Emma, serving aboard the heavy cruiser Constitution, and of all the children who would never know freedom if humanity submitted today. "Stratarch Vinex, I have indeed considered your offer very carefully." "Excellent. The wisdom of submission, and my answer is no." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ambient hum of the ship's systems seemed to quiet, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Vilex's mandibles clicked in what was clearly agitation, a sound that the translation software couldn't interpret but needed no interpretation. "You cannot be serious. Your species possesses primitive technology,
no significant combat experience, and a mere handful of ships. We are offering you survival.
Here's what we're offering you, Chen said, her voice carrying across not just to the Kythara, but to every human ship in the fleet through the open comm channels. We're offering you the chance to learn why every species that has ever underestimated humanity has regretted it. We're offering you a lesson in why the universe made us the way we are. Adaptive, stubborn, and too stupid to know when we're beaten. Vilex's image flickered with what might have been amusement.
Your bravado is noted, Admiral. But bravado does not overcome the mathematics of warfare. You face a force that has conquered the hegemony of worlds, the Crystal Dominion, and the Synthetic Collective. Each believed themselves unique. Each believed they possessed some special quality that would allow them to prevail. Each now serves the Imperium with gratitude.
Maybe, Chen replied, but none of them were human. The transmission ended abruptly. Around the war room, Chen's officers stared at her with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Captain Morrison was the first to speak. Admiral, that was either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. Probably both, Chen admitted. But we've reached the point where brave and foolish are the same thing. Admiral, Hayes said quietly, with respect, how exactly do we back up that level of defiance? Their fleet outguns us 10 to 1. Their ships are faster, better armored, and equipped with weapons we can't even classify. What's our plan here? Chen turned to address the room, looking each of her officers in the eye. These were good people, she thought. The transmission ended abruptly. Around the war room, Chen's officers stared at her with expressions ranging from admiration to concern. Captain Morrison was the first to speak. Admiral, that was either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. Probably both, Chen admitted. But we've reached the point where brave and foolish are the same thing. They'd followed her this far, and they deserved to know what she was asking of them. Gentlemen, ladies, for the past 3 months, we've been studying Kythara tactics, trying to figure out how to beat them at their own game. That was our first mistake. We don't need to beat them at their game. We need to force them to play ours. She gestured to the tactical display. Look at their formation. Perfect symmetry, optimal fire angles, textbook spacing. It's beautiful, efficient, and completely rigid. They've never had to adapt because they've never faced an enemy that didn't fight by their rules. What are you proposing? Asked Captain Morrison. We're going to show them what human warfare really looks like. Not the clean, honourable battle they're expecting, but the kind of chaotic, unpredictable fight that our species evolved for. Chen's eyes gleamed with dangerous inspiration. Dr. Reeves, tell me about human military history. What makes us different? The xenobiologist straightened, understanding where this was going. Humans are persistence hunters, Admiral. We evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We're not the strongest or the fastest, but we're relentless. More importantly, we're pattern breakers. Every other species on Earth developed specialized survival strategies. Speed, strength, camouflage, venom. Humans developed adaptability. When faced with a superior predator, we didn't evolve bigger claws. We invented spears. Exactly. Commander Hayes, I want you to transmit the following battle plan to all ships. Priority Alpha encryption. The next few hours saw frantic preparation across the human fleet. Ships that had been positioned for traditional fleet engagement suddenly began moving in seemingly random patterns. The heavy cruiser Constitution and her sister ships spread out across a 3-dimensional grid that made no sense by conventional tactics. Fighters launched from carriers, but instead of forming protective screens, they scattered across the system in small, independent groups. Most unusually, supply ships that should have been retreating to safe distance moved closer to the action, their cargo bays mysteriously sealed and their energy signatures carefully masked. The civilian transport New Horizons, requisitioned for the war effort, took position in what appeared to be a completely exposed location between two asteroid clusters. Captain Reynolds of the supply ship Endurance contacted the flagship with barely concealed frustration. "Admiral, these positions leave us completely vulnerable. We're sitting ducks out here." "Trust me, Captain," Chen replied. "Just make sure your cargo bays are ready for Phase 2. When the Kythara fleet finally moved to engage, they advanced in their traditional formation, a perfect wall of destruction that had crushed every enemy they'd ever faced. Stratarch Vilex observed the human fleet's chaotic positioning with something approaching contempt. "Primitive indeed," he mused to his subordinates. "They cannot even maintain proper formation. This will be concluded swiftly." But as the two fleets closed to engagement range, the first hints that something was wrong began to emerge. The human ships weren't retreating or trying to match the Kythara formation. Instead, they were doing something that had never been done before. They were refusing to fight the battle the Kythara way. The first shock came when the human vanguard, instead of meeting the Kythara advance head-on, suddenly scattered like startled birds. The heavy cruiser Constitution dove below the orbital plane, rolling to present its smallest profile to enemy fire. The destroyer Yorktown climbed above the engagement zone, her engines flaring as she gained altitude that shouldn't have mattered in space combat. Still others began rapid course changes that should have been impossible for vessels of their size. "What are they doing?" demanded Vilex, as his perfect battle line suddenly found itself with no clear targets. This tactical officer, a Morphak named Kral, studied the displays with growing confusion. "Stratarch, they appear to be avoiding direct engagement while maintaining offensive capability." The second shock came 30 seconds later. Those scattered human ships weren't running, they were flanking. Suddenly, the Kythara found themselves taking fire from angles their formation had never been designed to defend against. Missiles launched from below struck the unarmored bellies of capital ships. Energy weapons fired from above targeted bridge sections never meant to face enemy fire. The Constitution, Emma Chen's ship, had positioned herself perfectly to rake the Kythara line from below. Her captain, James Martinez, was an old friend of the Admiral's and one of the few officers who had embraced her unconventional tactics from the beginning. "Target their sensor arrays," he ordered. "Make them fight blind." But the real surprise was yet to come. "Stratarch!" Krell's voice carried a note of panic. "We're detecting massive energy spikes from those human supply vessels." On the tactical display, the ships that had been dismissed as non-combatants suddenly revealed their true nature. Cargo bays split open to reveal massive kinetic launchers that had been hastily installed during the preparation phase. The supply ships were actually mobile weapons platforms, disguised to look harmless and positioned where no enemy would expect to find artillery. The Endurance was the first to fire, her jury-rigged mass driver hurling a tungsten rod at relativistic speeds toward a Kythara cruiser. The projectile, guided by targeting data from the scattered fighters, struck the alien ship's engine section with devastating effect. Admiral Chen watched the chaos unfold from the bridge of the Defiance with grim satisfaction. All ships, Phase 2. Show them what happens when you bring a sword to a gunfight. What followed was unlike any space battle in recorded galactic history. The humans didn't try to match the Kythara's superior firepower ship to ship. Instead, They fought like the pack hunters their species had evolved from. Individual human vessels would dart in to deliver devastating attacks, then fade away before the Kythara could respond effectively. Fighter squadrons appeared from asteroid fields where they'd been hiding, struck critical targets, and vanished again into the cosmic dust. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, piloting her fighter Phoenix from the asteroid belt, had been hiding for 6 hours among the rocky debris. When the Kythara flagship passed within range, she emerged like a predator from ambush, her missiles targeting the alien ship's communication arrays. "This is Phoenix. Direct hit on enemy command vessel. They're flying blind." The Kythara, for the first time in their military history, found themselves reacting instead of dictating the terms of battle. Their perfect formation began to break apart as ship commanders tried to engage enemies that refused to stay in one place long enough to be properly targeted. "This is impossible!" Vilex raged as reports of damage flooded in from across his fleet. "They're fighting without honor, without order!" "Stratarch," Krell said hesitantly, "perhaps we should adapt our formation to counter their tactics." The suggestion was almost heretical. The path of inevitable victory had never required adaptation, because it had never failed. But as another Kythara capital ship reported critical damage from what appeared to be a coordinated attack by tiny human fighters, Vilex faced a choice no Kythara commander had ever confronted: evolve or die. Impossible, he decided. Increase firepower, maintain formation. Their chaotic tactics cannot prevail against superior force. But Admiral Chen had anticipated this response. She'd studied the Kythara for 3 months, learning not just their tactics, but their psychology. They were a species that had achieved dominance through overwhelming force applied with perfect discipline. The very idea of changing their approach was foreign to them. "Phase 3, Chen announced calmly. "Time to show them the difference between tactics and strategy." Across the battlefield, the human fleet began its final gambit. Every ship that had been damaged or appeared to be retreating suddenly revealed itself to be exactly where it needed to be. The seemingly random movements of the past hour had actually been positioning humanity's forces for a devastating coordinated strike. The transport New Horizons, which had seemed so vulnerably positioned, suddenly opened her cargo bays to reveal a massive sensor array that had been tracking every Kythera ship. Her transmissions coordinated the entire human fleet into a single, devastating weapon. The Kythera found themselves caught in a 3-dimensional crossfire from enemies they couldn't pin down, using weapons they'd never seen before, employing tactics that violated every principle of proper warfare. Worse, the humans seemed to be learning and adapting in real time, adjusting their strategies based on Kythera responses. "Stratarch?" Krell's voice was barely above a whisper. "We've lost 17 Capity ships. The Huons have lost 4. Vilex stared at the tactical display in disbelief. This wasn't how wars were supposed to work. The superior force was supposed to win. The perfect formation was supposed to be unbeatable. The path of inevitable victory was supposed to be inevitable. "Sir?" another officer reported. "The human admiral is hailing us." Admiral Chen's image appeared on the Kythera command screens, and this time she wasn't standing in a war room. She was on the bridge of her ship, which was clearly in the middle of combat, with sparks flying and crew members rushing to damage control stations. The Defiance had taken hits, but she remained in the fight. "Stratarch Vilex," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around her. "I want you to understand something. This isn't about who has the bigger fleet or the more advanced technology. This is about what happens when you mistake civilization for weakness." Behind her, an explosion rocked the ship. but Chen didn't even flinch. You see, you've spent 2,000 years fighting species that played by your rules. But humans? We wrote the book on asymmetric warfare. We've been fighting against superior forces since we were throwing rocks at mammoths. Another explosion, closer this time. Chen's tactical officer shouted something about hull breaches, but the Admiral continued speaking as if she were having a casual conversation. The thing about humans is that we don't fight fair. We fight to win. And sometimes, Stratarch, winning means being willing to do things that your perfect, orderly society never prepared you for. The transmission ended, and in the silence that followed, Vilex finally understood what was happening. The humans weren't just fighting a different kind of battle. They were fighting from an entirely different philosophy of warfare. Where the Kythara sought to impose order through superior force, humans embraced chaos and turned it into a weapon. Stratarch, Krell said quietly, "What are your orders?" For the first time in his career, Vilex didn't have an answer. The path of inevitable victory had no contingency for this situation, because this situation had never been imagined. The battle continued for another 2 hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The human fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, systematically dismantled the Kythara formation through a combination of superior tactics, adaptability, and sheer bloody-minded determination. When it was over, the mighty Kythara expeditionary force that had conquered dozens of worlds limped away with less than half their ships intact. In the aftermath, as damage reports came in from across the human fleet, Admiral Chen stood in her battered war room and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd lost good ships and good people, but they'd accomplished something unprecedented. They'd forced the galaxy to recognize that humanity was not just another species to be catalogued and conquered. Commander Hayes approached with the final casualty reports. "Admiral, we lost the Endeavour, the Constellation, and the New Horizons. Total casualties, 2,437. Chen nodded solemnly. Each number represented families that would never be whole again. Dreams that would never be fulfilled. Captain Morrison's cross caught the light as she bowed her head in a moment of silent prayer for the fallen. "What about the Kythara?" Chen asked. "Intelligence estimates they lost over 20,000 personnel and half their fleet. More importantly, Admiral, we're picking up communications chatter from across the sector. Word of the battle is spreading. Other species are talking about what happened here today." Chen understood the implications immediately. For 2 millennia, the Kythara had maintained their empire through the perception of invincibility. Today, that perception had been shattered. Every conquered species would now know that the Imperium could be defeated, that their perfect formations and overwhelming force could be overcome by the right combination of courage, ingenuity, and sheer stubborn determination. 3 weeks later, Admiral Chen stood before the assembled United Earth Council to deliver her report. The politicians wanted to know about casualty figures, fleet readiness, and diplomatic possibilities. But what they really wanted to understand was how humanity had achieved the impossible. "The question isn't how we won," Chen told them. "The question is why we won. Every other species the Kythara encountered tried to fight them on their terms, using conventional tactics against a conventionally superior force. We won because we refused to accept their definition of warfare. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the battle. The Kythara called us primitives. And, in some ways, they were right. We don't have their technology or their perfect formations. But we have something they've never encountered. The willingness to adapt, to improvise, and to fight dirty when survival is on the line. The council chairman leaned forward. Admiral, what do you think this means for humanity's future in the galaxy? Chen smiled, the same cold smile she'd worn in the moments before the battle. It means we've just announced to the galaxy that humanity is not going quietly to anyone's empire. We've shown them that there's a new player in the game, and we play by our own rules. She paused, looking out the viewport at the stars beyond. The Kythara spent 2,000 years believing that might makes right, that superior force is the only currency that matters in the universe. Today, they learned that sometimes the universe has other ideas. As she spoke, reports were already coming in from across human space. The story of the Battle of Kepler Junction was spreading like wildfire through underground networks on conquered worlds. Resistance movements that had been dormant for generations were stirring to life. Species that had submitted to Kythara rule were beginning to ask dangerous questions about whether submission had been necessary after all. The galaxy was about to discover what humanity had always known. But the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't the biggest gun or the strongest armor. It's an intelligent species that refuses to admit defeat, that treats every setback as a learning opportunity, and that views impossible odds not as reason to surrender, but as a challenge to prove everyone wrong. In the months that followed, as the Kythara Imperium found itself facing the first real challenges to its authority in 2 millennia, one phrase would echo through intelligence briefings and military planning sessions across the galaxy. When discussing the strange, adaptable species that had emerged from the Sol system, alien commanders would use a term that roughly translated to space orcs. Primitive by galactic standards, but possessed of a savage cunning and indomitable will that made them far more dangerous than their technology suggested. Humanity had found its place in the galactic community, not as subjects to be ruled or primitives to be protected, but as the species that had reminded the universe that evolution doesn't always favor the biggest teeth or the heaviest armor. Sometimes, it favors the ones smart enough to use everyone else's assumptions against them. The war for human independence was far from over, but the galaxy now knew one thing with absolute certainty. When humanity said no, they meant it. And backing up that no was the most terrifying force in the known universe. Human ingenuity unleashed by desperate necessity and guided by the unshakable belief that any problem can be solved if you're willing to think differently enough. The age of easy conquest was over. The age of humanity had begun.